afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. I'm happy to be here today to talk about Chapter 8 of the National Education Policy, which is all about standard setting and accreditation for school education. I'm just going to make some preliminary remarks, namely that before I became a education journalist, I was a business journalist. And I believe that the magazine which I was the founder editor of, Business India and Business World, they catalyzed the liberalization and deregulation of the Indian economy in 1991, and which doubled our annual rate of GDP growth. So I'm a believer in liberalization of education. So therefore, my first question I'm going to ask is, Dr. From Azim Premji University, Dr. Rishikesh, I'll ask you first. According to Chapter 8, what I read here, there are 6 or 7 regulatory authorities which are specified here. Namely, one is the Department of School Education, Directorate of School Education, including offices of DEO and BEO. Then there is the State School Standards Authority. Then there is also SCRT. Then there is boards of examination in each state. So I want to ask you, do you believe that the new education policy is a step towards liberalization or greater control of Indian education, which in my opinion hasn't worked for the last 50 years. If you read our latest story, cover story in Education World, is titled 12 Uninterrupted Rackets Destroying Indian Education for the last 50 years. Because, in my opinion, that's because of too much over-regulation. So, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Thakur. Thank you, Chair. There is one phrase in the National Education Policy that all of us are familiar with. It says light but tight regulation. And that precisely tells us what is it that the architects of the policy have thought about in terms of regulation for our education system. As Mr. Thakur rightly said, we have been over-regulated. The genuine innovative practices have been curbed because of over-regulation. At the same time, the regulation where it ought to happen has not happened. Because of it, there has also been over-commercialization, which has not served the purpose of enhancing the education quality in our country. So in short, what the National Education Policy is attempting to do is reformulate the manner in which regulation happens. And that is the reason why we need to rethink of what is regulation. In the morning, in fact, when Mr. Bose was talking, he did bring in this change that has happened from the draft to the main policy, and wherein SSRA, which was a regulatory authority, has been called now the Standards Authority. In fact, that is actually for the better, because what has happened during the deliberations after the draft policy is what happened is that by using the term regulation, which has already been very abused, now you bring it in, it's very difficult then to go about the paradigm shift that NEP is talking about. That's the reason why instead of regulation, standards was adopted. And it is standards that is going to be, as in the previous panel it was being discussed, which is going to be evaluated through self-assessments initially. If you look at the draft policy, which gives out all the details of how would we want to regulate, it is very clearly by our own admissions. So through self-assessment, through various other means, before a standards authority can come and look at us. Because the entire principle here is really moving towards quality rather than holding back. I'll pause here, sir. Thanks.
Mr. Srinivasan, when I was reading through this chapter, I noticed a lot of phrases here which have been for quite long in education policies. One is commercialization and exploitation of parents by for-profit private schools. And another, and the policy very clearly says they prefer philanthropic private schools. Now, according to my research and whatever my knowledge, Indian education private education is the cheapest in the world. Even in African countries, you don't get private education at these prices. It's available at all price points. So do you see in the NEP 2020 a continuous prejudice against private education, which, let me inform you, in schools, 48% of all children in school today.
Thank you. It's a very pertinent question because we need to speak truth and be ready to accept the truth. The truth is, when you say private schools, there is investment, there is ROI, there is interest. What does it mean? It is commerce. It is not simple education. And also, the management has to provide for lean time, for difficult times. We always have one problem, that all of a sudden 200 children can leave our school. What do you do? Do you think you can sack proportionate teachers? You may not be able to. That will lead to another legal battle. So, considering all these things, blaming private schools or commercializing is wrong. What they should do is pinpoint a particular school who is exploiting the parents and punish them. Let them investigate. They are there only for that. The business of the government is to locate the problem, investigate and punish. Why are you punishing everybody and putting all of us into one group, saying that you're all thieves? That is wrong. And in NEP they say we are going to go forward only with the private schools. But I don't think the spirit is 100% upheld throughout. There are places where they don't want. Number two, you asked about philanthropic schools. What I have been saying is, why can't both exist? If I want to establish a philanthropic school, nobody stops me. If he wants to establish a commercial school, nobody should stop him. Even now he is doing, even now we are doing. Only thing is, we are telling some kind of lies because we are forced to do that. We are not proud of what we have been able to achieve. We have to hide that. If one school can charge 5 lakhs per year for a day school, they should be proud to say that. They said, no, we charge 2 lakhs. But if you see the accounts, it's 5 lakhs. Why? Because everybody is near to you. The government says you are an elite school. I think even Shashi keeps saying that word elite school. That's a point of discussion between us. So you become elite school. Elite means bad. Which dictionary says elite means bad? Yeah, you only attribute it to that. So there are so many things like that. My answer to this question is, we need to have proper understanding of the system of Indian education and compare it with the education of the world. Like Mr. Thakur said, we are the cheapest in the world, and I will add, we give a quality education. Now why you want to fiddle with that? And nobody wants to listen to us and see how to make policies. They make policies, like yesterday I was talking, it is all top-down policies. We don't even understand. Whereas progressive countries, countries who stand first in this world, it is 100% bottom-up. If you go to Finland, if one teacher writes one note, it is researched thoroughly and see what is the implication. And that system is improved, I should say, every minute. Here, what the schools do, teachers do, don't become a part of a data for improvement. What they manufacture sitting at desks, that is important. Worse, there are some universities where they create data, they create system, they create policies. How is that? Even NCERT for that matter, what do they do? Did any of the NCERT professors come to your school? Then what do? They sit in the office and they make policies. So why can't we change this? Then these two words will not come. That is my idea. Thank you.
Thank you. It's also worth noting that in the Kasturi Rangan committee, which was the basis for forming this policy, there's not a single school representative. They were all from higher education and all not particularly distinguished academics. Anyway, sir, may I ask you about, private education? One of the criticisms that is made of private education is, like Mr. Srinivasan said, that they are elite schools. Do you find that in Goa is the most literate state in India, and most of the schools there are either, correct me if I'm wrong, are either aided schools or private schools. So my question is, to what extent do you feel that there is a inbuilt bias in the NEP 2020 against private schools?
Thank you, sir. As far as Goa is concerned, since it is a very small state, and your question is very pertinent, and you also said that most educated, lot is in Goa. Not only children, but even the parents. So they are able to understand, and out of those parents only the politicians are made. Even politicians are not much bothered about your RT and now NEP. So they are not bothered about RTE Act. We have not yet implemented not even 1% of RTE, when all the other states are suffering due to implementation of RTE provisions. Some of the schools are already closed. But that experience we have not undergone. And bias, to some extent, which is already there earlier also, that continues, because the government is dealing with only government schools, to some extent aided schools. Whereas private schools were not at all paid any attention.
That's a good thing, right?
Yeah, they were not at all paid any attention. And so now also, during RT, of course RT is not going to be closed. RT is an act, central act, and NEP is only framework, and already we have discussed. So within the framework of RT, NEP is going to be followed. And we don't find any problem with this. And most of the states, I think they have already climbed the ladder of this NEP implementation, at least 1 or 2 steps. But we are still on the, not even on the first step. One leg is on the first step. And they have only formed the task force committee. And they have not included the private school representative. We have already taken up the matter with them to include private school representatives, so that we are also stakeholders. So I don't find any problems to be faced by us, as we have already experienced. No problems, no issues with RT. And even though when, NISA, our national body, was constituted, we were the first to become the member without any problems, because we foresee problems anytime. The government is changing, the mind of the politicians may change. So we want to be with NISA, and we want to continue, and we are learning a lot from other states. That's very important.
Yes. On the subject, thank you very much. On the subject of NISA, sir, I want to ask you, this policy talks about egalitarian treatment, no distinction between government and private schools, and budget private schools. However, your experience in NISA, particularly in the pandemic, has been very bad. For example, you've been asking for MSME status. So do you think this policy, which talks about equal treatment for all schools, is likely to happen under NEP 2020?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Basically, private schools are the biggest asset of our country. We are nation builders. according to our Constitution and Right to Education Act, it is the responsibility of the government to offer free and compulsory education till 14 years of age. And private schools are shouldering 50% of the responsibility of the government without having spent government a single rupee, without having any burden to the government. The private schools are doing the job, or 50% of the job are done by
Sir,
private
may I just inform the audience, for your information, budget private schools, there are 400,000 of them in India, and they educate a staggering number of 60 million students. And you
Yeah.
continue.
So, these schools should be protected, they should be given proper support by the government rather than imposing various kinds of regulations. For instance, let us think, there are over 5.5 lakh private schools in India. If government has to establish so many schools, how much funds it has to allocate for that? So these schools are to be protected, they must be given proper support. And private schools not only catering the needs of the elite society, but they are offering quality education at very, very low cost to many below poverty line people. I can set an example to you. I'll take example of Hyderabad, where from I have come. In Hyderabad, we have about 1400 slum areas. There are such biggest slums. In each slum, there are more than 1 lakh population. So like that, if you go across all our metros, we have close to 35 to 40% of the population habitating in the slum areas, where the education is being provided by the budget private schools. And now, coming to the NEP, nothing is written in the NEP to support these schools rather than simply creating some kind of regulatory architecture. But one good welcoming thing is that they wanted to establish an autonomous regulatory authority which will regulate both government and private schools equally, which is a welcoming thing. But to the experience what we have seen from NISA, all over India, none of the state governments is trying to implement this regulatory architecture, SSSA, State School Standards Authority, as it is intended. They are simply changing the names of the existing education department, and then there is no proper autonomy. Till now, none of the states have come up with a pakka policy for the implementation. And then our stand is only one thing, that the intent of this regulatory architecture, particularly Chapter 8, the independent autonomous status should be given to the private schools, and both private and government schools must be treated equally. And if requires, rather than doing policing, they have to support these all schools wherever they need. They have to extend support for training the teachers as well, and also offer loans at very low interest or otherwise subsidized loans, as the government is giving to the MSMEs, to the private schools as well, because we are the largest employment providers of the country.
2 million teachers.
Yes, none of the government, even the government of India, the total number of employees that are there in the government of India, number of employment that is created by the private schools are more than the total number of government employees that are there in the government of India.
Okay, sir. Now let's.
So, here during the pandemic, schools are very badly hit, but no any kind of support was extended to the schools. That is a very pathetic situation.
In case, I'm sure you are aware, education world has been supporting you all throughout to be granted MSME status for several, throughout the past 2 years.
Yes.
Yes. Now let's move on to the next question. You know, the government has, under the new education policy, they're going to set up a lot of committees, as we saw. But you know, they've been setting up committees in the past also for regulating fees, etc., etc. But the point is, who are the people who are put into these committees? How confident are you that the people who will be appointed to head these committees and man these committees will actually not have that bias which we've seen for the last 50 years against private schools? Madam.
Thank you, sir. In fact, you should not be the last speaker or the last one to eat. You will be neither left with the food to eat nor to say any words, because all the eminent speakers already have said, but you asked a very important question. Who should be the persons who should be given? I'm thinking of a small story of a 5-year-old boy written by Mullapudi Venkatramana in 1960s. He wrote about this boy who did not go to school, but there was a tutor who was brought home to teach this boy. He was a very naughty boy. So every 1 week, one tutor used to go, another tutor used to come, and this boy, with the help of his grandmother, always used to chase away the tutor. So once he has written one do's and don'ts for all these tutors. That is, the first rule is that the outgoing tutor should tell the incoming tutor in which direction to turn the ear of Budugu. Budugu is this boy's name. Because the first one is turning forward, the second one is turning backwards. The third one is again turning forwards. At this rate, my ear will fall off. So please, the outgoing should always tell the incoming which one to turn. Now, we are Budugus. So we should tell the people who has to turn our ear or in which direction, number one. And second question comes, as the gentleman from Bombay said, Maharashtra said, should we tell or should we not tell? Or should we tell the right thing is also in our hands. But I'm also the assessor from the Quality Council of India. Quality Council of India says very clearly that it is not comparing A with B. A is A, B is B. It is your own policies, it is your own finances, it is your own clientele, it is your own stakeholders. How did you create your processes, and are you standing up to your own processes? That is what is for accreditations, and that is the standard. That is what Mr. Raju also said. So setting the standard is each school's. We cannot compare any school with any other school, number one, because our stakeholders are different, their needs and their requirements are different. Second thing is also that definitely every school, private school, is working and bending backwards to attend to the needs and the requirements of their stakeholders. In that case only they can survive in the market. Yeah, I'm using the word of commerce here. If you have to survive in the market, you need to deliver to your stakeholders who are your customers. So every one of us are working for that. So since we are the people who are contributing for the growth of education sector in this country, and like all the private sectors in this country are being supported, we should be supported, and we should be asked who should be the person to touch our ear, or should we allow someone to touch or not? Thank you very much.
Dr. Rishikesh, I wanted to ask you, you know, somebody said this morning that we are such a diverse country. Does it make any sense to have a national education policy which kind of tries to pass rules, laws, regulations which are applicable to all, like 1.5 million schools in India? Some are private budget, some are government, some are elite, some are mid-priced. I mean, does it make any sense? Because I think you said that the positive thing about the policy is that it's self-regulatory. But do you really believe that?
So what I was suggesting is that there is a paradigm shift in the kind of architecture that the national education policy is talking about. So we need to understand as to what that paradigm shift is, and for that what kind of preparedness is required. So one of the paradigm shift is as to how can we ensure that we regulate ourselves to enhance our quality. In the morning we had our friend from Central Square Foundation present to us the national level data that ASR keeps giving us every year.
So wouldn't you say that the school principal or the parents and principals together are the best judges of what is the kind of education the children should receive? Why should it be done from Delhi to decide what is the good education?
Yeah. See, because we like it or not, we are a country and we are governed. We are a country. We are a country and we are governed by the framework of the constitution through which we have our educational aims. Because we are a democratic country, we have a certain educational aim. If we were a dictatorial country, if we were a communist country, we would have had a different kind of an aim. Now, having said that, so it is the part of the central government's role to give the vision to our country, the vision of what kind of a society do we want. And it is in these policies that that vision is articulated. And as Dr. Vishal was saying, finally we are a federal setup. And because education is in the concurrent subject list, though that is the vision and that is the policy, how do you implement each of the state is going to get a lot of flexibility, similar to the Right to Education Act. Even though there is a national act, but at the end of the day, the model rules were framed by each state. There were only some of those non-negotiables in RTE, but after that, the model rules were framed by each state. So that is the reason why it is important for us to have a broad national curriculum framework or national policy, but based on whatever flexibility that is there, we can always contextualize
As
it.
you said, it has to be a light but tight kind of framework. And maximum autonomy should be given to schools. Should it not?
Absolutely,
Because
absolutely.
ultimately, it's for the parents and the principals to decide. And as Dr. Chandrasekhar, Mrs. Chandrasekhar observed, finally, if you don't deliver the kind of education that parents want and children want, you're going to go out of business, as it were. And for your information, isn't it, I want to ask Mr. Srinivasan, isn't it true that the Supreme Court has held now that schools can make that provision of education is a vocation, is a legitimate vocation, and schools can make a reasonable profit so that they can sustain themselves. So in spite of that, why is there this still kind of pejorative statements made in the policy about private education?
Actually, these two are two different things. What Supreme Court says is, you can have a surplus. The word profit cannot be used in the context of schools. And that surplus can be 15%. So you have to show that you have utilized 85% of your revenue in that year. In case you did not, you have to take exemption from the income tax department. And the 15% that you save, you can carry it forward. I think it is for 5 or 6 years. That amount you can use for building another project, another school. To that extent, it's okay. Where the problem comes in, interfering in the school's administration. You should charge only this much fees. You should only do this. You should not do this. There are so many restrictions. Schools respond to the parents. I remember in the Supreme Court, Justice Kabadi asked, "Oh, you have swimming pool in your school?" Very interesting. He was shocked that a school had a swimming pool. If we are like that, then what can we do? It is a demand of the parents that we have a swimming pool and children learn. What's the harm in that? Swimming pool is nothing but another kabaddi ground or basketball ground or football ground. What's the difference? So the mindset has to change. I'm not saying make it so free that schools can root the parents. No. Don't punish the good people because of the bad people. This is my contention, not anything else. Don't let the schools go scot-free. No. At the same time, don't let a sword hang on everybody's neck. This is my point.
It might be pertinent to note, ladies and gentlemen, that in China, which is a communist country, for-profit schools are allowed. Yeah.
There is no other country, I think, where for-profit schools are not allowed.
We are like that only, as we say. So, Are we run out of time?
We can take a few questions from the audience if that's all right.
Okay, yeah, fine. with
Let's
me.
throw it open to the audience. Any specific questions that the audience has? Dr. Srinivasan, you wanted to speak?
Only one point.
Yeah, please.
Because it is a roadmap ahead, I have 2 points. If the policy is implemented sincerely, the merit and standard of teachers will either go up or the teachers will go out of the system. Teachers who are not capable of dealing with this with understanding cannot continue, and we may gain the respect to teachers in the next few years. That will push the training institutes to look at quality training. This is my guess, and I hope it comes true.
We'll take a few questions from the audience.
See, particularly regarding the constitution of the SSSA, we all have to educate all the stakeholders of education and raise a voice that the NCERT should frame perfect guidelines for constitution of SSSA in the states, so that there cannot be much deviation in constituting the SSSA, so that we will have at least some autonomy. That should be the focus area. So all the associations and all the stakeholders have to focus on this point, that let us try to bring pressure upon the NCERT, the national body, so that it will prepare proper framework for the constitution of SSSA.
I think he means transparency in appointing people to all these bodies. Then it will be fine.
But what's going to happen is that all friends and relations and retired politicians and bureaucrats are going to be appointed to these positions. And that means you'll go back to where we were.
Okay, a quick question, because this session is about the next steps, the blueprint for the implementation of NEP. And here the key question is, the NEP talks about autonomy of schools and trust teacher. But those, I mean, the policymakers in that sense have done a very good job, but the challenge is at the bureaucracy level. The mindset is clearly to control, and they are the one authorized to give you autonomy. So in this case, what's the suggestion from the panel? What could be the strategy, idea, opportunity as to how do we get that opportunity, the autonomy?
Atulji, who is the question directed to?
I'll try to answer this question. See, primarily our responsibility is that in every state, a draft committee will be constituted for implementation of the NEP. There should be compulsory, the members of the associations, part of that draft committee should be made. Proper deliberations must be done, because we are the 50% stakeholders of the school education. So without our participation, okay, if any draft is prepared for the implementation, that shouldn't be accepted, and then in that proactive way we have to go. That is the first step that we have to take.
I think teachers also need to be involved in teachers and teachers
I think
in the formulation of policy.
the same question I think I could expect answer from Rishikesh. It will be more relevant because he is in Karnataka and task force.
No, I think, Dr. Atul, your question, I mean, you probably have a better experience in terms of dealing with the bureaucracy at Delhi, right? And it comes from there as well. So bureaucracy, the nature of bureaucracy is that, and that's the unfortunate colonial hang-up that we have in terms of, the regulatory mindset that they come with. So it is going to take a while, and that's the reason why these changes are not going to be overnight. It's over a period of time that we will have to push for, and that's why everyone here is also important stakeholders. But then what we need to keep in mind is, your slides in the morning, with regard to what is it that our objective is. Our learning levels are very, very pathetic, be it government or private. We are speaking about budget schools here. It is nothing to be really proud of. It could be just marginally different. So that is something that we all have to strive to improve. And our focus really has to be on that. And in fact, I don't know where even Mr. Thakur is saying this prerogative to, in terms of what the policy says against private, but I do see that the policy very single-mindedly focusing on the criticality of enhancing the quality of our education system, because if not, we will fail our country. So it's not really about government or private, and that's the reason why they are also talking about everyone being seen equally, because every single stakeholder's quality will have to be enhanced. So there is no really, an answer to how do we ensure this autonomy from the bureaucracy, but then I think we will all have to strive towards it, because it's only through that autonomy, as you were also saying, that we will be able to enhance quality. Through regulation, we have seen quality has only gone down, and hence autonomy has to be provided. But however, of course, there has to be a balance with accountability, and that is where the light regulation comes.
From over-regulation, we've got to go to modest regulation, I mean, basically. Yes.
Yeah, I'm Thomas Anthony, and I'm from National Independent Schools Alliance. My question is to Mr. Rishikesh. For example, so NEP 2020 fixed the target of achieving 50% of gross enrollment rate in higher education, right? So because I am from Tamil Nadu, so Tamil Nadu is putting this point like we are already ahead of like 35 years in this, what NEP has trying to achieve it. So as a national education policy, because we keep hearing that there were a lot of consultations happening, still why we are having this problem in the policy? Because if it's already in the policy, then when we are implementing it, again, it's going to be a big problem. So that's how states always respond to the national policies. My first question. And second question, I'm feeling still we were not able to fix the financial liability to this policy, because that's what happened in the RTE. Still we are in the 75-25% of a battle after like 11, 12 years now. Still the reimbursements are not happening. So my fear is like, again, we will get into the same kind of a situation where the central and the state will keep battling, and the schools and the students will keep facing a problem on the ground.
So the first question, since it's about higher education, I'll very briefly touch upon it. It may not be relevant to everyone here.
Maybe I given the example of higher education, but my point is like there are already states achieved certain things, but how was the national policy is going to support it?
Yeah. No, for instance, the example that you gave is a very valid one. Our higher education gross enrollment ratio currently stands at 26.7%. So which basically means 75% of our youth between 18 to 23 are not in higher education, and we get 26.7 with states like Tamil Nadu providing 75% almost. So you can just imagine as to what's happening in the rest of the country in terms of 18 to 23-year-olds going into colleges, right? So it is keeping that in mind, the national average that NEP is saying should at least move to doubling this in about 10 years time, 10 to 15 years time they say, of reaching 50%. So which basically means a state like Tamil Nadu reaching 100. And maybe somewhere else where in Assam, which is I think about 13-14%, reaching to about 25-30. So that's the roadmap which NEP puts forth. And hence, as Mr. Thakur was saying, I mean, does it make sense to have a national policy at all, given the diversity and given the variation? Well, it still makes sense to have a national policy because, as I said, I mean, we are a nation state and we have to think of these things together, right? But then each one's target would be different. And that is why one target will not make sense. If Tamil Nadu is today at 70%, they'll have to aim for 90%. If, Karnataka is at the national average of about 26%, so we have to aim for 50%. So that's the way I think we'll have to look at it. Yeah, financial, sorry, that's something very critical, and that's the reason why it came in the policy. I was party to some of the deliberations, and hence I know that there was a lot of discussion even with the bureaucracy, wherein they said that it is impossible to provide the kind of funds that education asks or health asks because there are so many other priorities. But then what was finally stuck to by the architects of the policy is without putting the money into what we are talking, there's just no point in even talking, right? And 6% of the GDP is being spoken of since Kothari Commission. And we are nowhere close. At closest we came was 20 years ago in 2000s when we were at around 4%. So what NEP also says is that they give a roadmap to that as well. 6% of GDP approximately translates to about 20% of expenditure of the government. Currently the government expenditure is about 10%, right? So NEP says every year promise to the country that we are going to further extend it by 1% of the total government expenditure. So that in 10 years time, from 10% we at least move to 20%. But yes, it's absolutely critical, otherwise there's no point at all. It can't be done.
ಸರ್ ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ನಾನೊಬ್ಬ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಆಗಿ ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಈ NEP-ಯಿಂದ ಕನ್ನಡ ವಿಜಯ್ ಶೆಟ್ಟಿ ಸರ್ಗೆ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಅಂದ್ಕೊಂಡು ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಈ NEP-ಯಿಂದ ಪ್ರಾದೇಶಿಕ ಭಾಷೆ, ಇತಿಹಾಸ ಮತ್ತು ಜನಜೀವನದ ಕುರಿತಾದಂಥ ಶಿಕ್ಷಣಕ್ಕೆ ಯಾವುದೇ ರೀತಿಯಾದಂಥ ತೊಂದರೆ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ವ? ಪ್ರಾದೇಶಿಕತೆಯನ್ನು ಒಳಗೊಂಡಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಭಾಷೆ, ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿ, ಇತಿಹಾಸ, ಜನಜೀವನ ಇದರ ಕುರಿತಾದಂಥ ಶಿಕ್ಷಣಕ್ಕೆ ಪಠ್ಯಗಳ ಮೇಲೆ ಪರಿಣಾಮ ಬೀರೋದಿಲ್ವಾ, ದುಷ್ಪರಿಣಾಮ ಬೀರೋದಿಲ್ವಾ?
Dr. Srinivas will be able to attempt this.
ಯಾರಾದರೂ ಸರಿ
Sir, English is the link language of
ಹೇಳಿ.
India.
I can do a rough translation.
Yeah, now.
See, he's talking
as
about
you-
localization.
As you all know, this national education policy is ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳ. ಈಗ ನ್ಯಾಷನಲ್ ಎಜುಕೇಶನ್ ಪಾಲಿಸಿ ಇದೊಂದು ಸೆಂಟ್ರಲ್ ಫ್ರೇಮ್ವರ್ಕ್, ಬಟ್ ಅಲ್ಟಿಮೇಟ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಂದು ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ ಗವರ್ಮೆಂಟು ಕೂಡ ದೇ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಟು ವರ್ಕ್ ವಿದಿನ್ ದಟ್. ಅಂದರೆ ನ್ಯಾಷನಲ್ ಎಜುಕೇಶನ್ ಪಾಲಿಸಿ ಅಥವಾ RT, ಅದರ ವಿದಿನ್ ದ ಫ್ರೇಮ್ವರ್ಕ್ ಆಫ್ ದ್ಯಾಟ್ we have to work out and we have to make modifications as per our ನಿಮ್ಮ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿ ಅಥವಾ ನೀವು ಹೇಳ್ತಿದ್ದೀರ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಈ ರಾಷ್ಟ್ರದ ಭಾಷೆ, ಅದರ ಇತಿಹಾಸ, ಅವೆಲ್ಲ ಅವರು ಕನ್ಸಿಡರ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. ಅದು ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ ರೆಸ್ಪಾನ್ಸಿಬಿಲಿಟಿ. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವು ಕೂಡ ವಿ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಟು ಬಿ ಪಾರ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಇಟ್. ಅದಕ್ಕಾಗಿ ಇಂಪ್ಲಿಮೆಂಟೇಷನ್ ಕಮಿಟಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರೈವೇಟ್ ಸ್ಕೂಲ್ ರೆಪ್ರೆಸೆಂಟೇಟಿವ್ ಎವ್ರಿ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಕೇಳಲೇಬೇಕು. ದೇ ಆರ್ ನೆಗ್ಲೆಕ್ಟಿಂಗ್, ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ತಗೊಳ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅವರು.
ಅದೇ ಆ ರೀತಿ ಕೇಳುವವರ ಇಚ್ಛಾಶಕ್ತಿ ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಇದ್ದಾಗ, ಅವ್ರ ರೆಪ್ರೆಸೆಂಟೇಷನ್ ಸ್ಟ್ರಾಂಗ್ ಆಗಿ ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಇದ್ದಾಗ, ನಮ್ಮ ಮೇಲೆ ಬೇರೆ ಇತಿಹಾಸ, ಬೇರೆ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಮೇಲೆ ಹೇರಿಕೆ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ, ಈ ಲೋಕಲ್ ಸ್ಟೂಡೆಂಟ್ಸ್ಗಳ ಮೇಲೆ. ಆಗ ಸ್ಥಳೀಯ ಇತಿಹಾಸ ಅವನಿಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತೇ ಇರೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ಸ್ಥಳೀಯ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಅವನಿಗೆ ಪರಿಚಯ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕೇವಲ 20% ಸ್ಥಳೀಯ ಇತಿಹಾಸ ತಿಳ್ಕೊಂಡು 80% ಬೇರೆ ಇತಿಹಾಸವನ್ನು ತಿಳ್ಕೊಂಡಾಗ ಅವನಿಗೆ ಜ್ಞಾನದ ಕೊರತೆ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ವಾ? ನಾಲೆಡ್ಜ್, ಲ್ಯಾಕ್ ಆಫ್ ನಾಲೆಡ್ಜ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ.
ಈಗ ನೀವು ನ್ಯಾಷನಲ್ ಹಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿ,
Sir, you can have a bilateral discussion with, because none of us understand.
No,
Most of us don't.
he is very clear.
that's why I wanted to speak in English.
I would suggest, sir, I'll just give you a brief and then sir should probably respond in English because there's a wide audience here. We have guests from 12 different states. So if you speak in English, it is of benefit to a lot of people.
Yes.
ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡಬೇಕು, ಆಮೇಲೆ ಮಾತಾಡೋಣ.
Okay, ಇರ್ಲಿ, ನಾನೇ ಕೇಳಿದ್ದು one question, no problem. You can that.
Yeah. Now I'll continue in English now. As he rightly said, 80% is from outside the state, which is not relevant for the state. But for your information, our country is India. We are supposed to know the history of the India. But what we have learnt because of 70 years, what we talk about, it is all about the Mughal kingdom, which is not the correct picture of the history. That is what now we are able to understand. And we are trying to unlearn that and learn more about other warriors, other national leaders, which were not taught to us in full length, maybe in one paragraph or so. So, as you rightly said, state history is also very important. Along with that, even national history is also required. Maybe 50-50, if not, more 80% state and 20% others. It can be 50%.
Actually, this has been addressed already in NCF. What should be the thing? ಇವೆಲ್ಲವೂ ಆ ರಾಜ್ಯದ ನೆಲ, ಜಲ, ಸಂಸ್ಕಾರ, ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿಯನ್ನ ಎಷ್ಟು ತೆಗೆದುಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು NCF ಕರಿಕ್ಯುಲಮ್ ಫ್ರೇಮ್ವರ್ಕ್ ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಸ್ಪಷ್ಟವಾದ ಮಾಹಿತಿ ಇದೆ.
Yeah, just like to add to that. So, Shashi aur held that in NCF 2005 itself, we have taken a certain approach towards ensuring that there is localization of whatever we do, be it in history or be it in anything else, so that children first look at acquiring whatever is around them. In fact, now early years, when we look at the kind of pedagogy and curriculum that is spoken of, it is always about the immediate environment of the child through which the child is taught. Just one thing on, because this has come already 2-3 times, in terms of representation of everyone in the implementation committees. Well, in Karnataka, the implementation task force has representation from the private schools as well. So, and also the private people as well. So don't know whether your organization members are part of it, but then there is representation for that. How they selected who, we don't know.
Rishi, this is the problem. Stakeholders are not given importance. Individual is been given importance in the name of private schools. Larger picture, ground reality, grassroots issues are known only to the stakeholders because they come across with many things. If I am a private school, I know only about my school. If I am a stakeholder, I know all type of all strains. So that is where representation is out, and there is a provision ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಗೆ ಕೊಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆ ಹೋಗಿ ಇಂಡಿವಿಜುವಲ್ ಆಗಬಾರ್ದು.
I agree.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the panel. Mr. Thakur, for wonderfully managing the panel.